Hi, folks. Welcome back to Points of Order podcast. I'm your host, Kody Blois, Member of Parliament in Kings Hants, and our apologies. We've been about a month since our last podcast, but I hope you'll forgive us. We've had a federal budget and lots of parliamentary work that has kept us busy. This is our 10th episode, and very pleased to have the Honourable Stephen McNeil, the former Premier of Nova Scotia, who served from 2013 to just around February of 2021. He's going to be joining us here today. Stephen, thanks so much for jumping on the show.
No, happy to be with you, Kody. I'm looking forward to it.
So there's so many different angles in terms of the questions that I could ask. And of course, you're synonymous, having led us through the pandemic. I know we're still in the midst of it, but you've been a very consequential premier for the past 8 years. But I want to start, for those that might not know, a little bit about who Stephen McNeil was before public life. Can you talk a little bit about your family upbringing and a little bit about your time before you even got into public life?
Sure. I'm the 12th of 17 kids. My parents left Halifax in the late 60s and came to a little community called Upper Granville, where I presently live. I'm actually living in the house that they bought in 1968. Henry and I bought it from my mother in 1991. This is the place where we all grew up in many ways. It was a wonderful community. My dad passed away pretty young in the early 1970s. My mom was left to raise 13 of us by herself. No job and no driver's license at the time, and she went on to become the first female sheriff in Canada. She was the rock that we all stood on. She was an amazing person who really was our guiding light. I had the good fortune of being able to stay here. I went to school at Akerley in Dartmouth and took a trade. I created an appliance repair business that I ran for 18 years here, and that allowed Andrew and I to raise Colleen and Jeffrey, our two kids, in this environment. So this is really the place that I'm rooted in. It's the values that I try to take with me, not only in politics, I think in generally when I ran my own business, fairness, respect, treat people, equally, all the things that I think were the hallmark of my time in office.
So you mentioned you ran a small repair business. You were a small business owner. I want to take you to the late 1990s. On my math, you would have been kind of mid to late 30s. What perpetuates that small town, small business, raising a family to saying, I want to jump into this business of politics and public life?
You know what? I actually thought about it. I thought I would do it at some point in my life. I never aspired to be the leader of a political party or to be the premier. To be honest with you, I probably have only, and when I ran, I was supporting the local candidate, the Liberal MLA, Laurie Montgomery at the time. I had worked on behalf of Earl Rafuse as well, and Harry Varon, who was the MP for all of whom were friends. And Laurie, I was Laurie's party president here at the time, and that was when the McClellan government fell on the budget vote. He announced he wasn't reoffering, and I actually wasn't going to run in that campaign, but with some encouragement from people, thought that I had something to offer. I decided to give it a go. I got nominated a couple of weeks into the election campaign. But you know what? It was a wonderful experience for me and for all of us, really. The community of Annapolis County was really kind to us as we traveled around campaigning. We didn't get the votes we needed to win, but it was, and to be honest, it's probably the best lesson I've ever had in politics. People vote for all kinds of reasons, and you can't take stuff personally. Some vote for you because of who you are. Some don't like you and they won't vote for you. Some don't like your party. Some like your party. Some like issues. So it's just, you can't take it personal that everyone has the right to exercise their view, and they did in 99. But that's really what happened. I had been involved with some local, the local community health board I sat on. I was sitting on Annapolis Ventures, which is a little economic development arm here that actually has a lot of federal money that they distribute out and try to create employment opportunities. So I was just involved that way, and I decided that this would be another way for me to try to help the community that I really has given me a great deal.
So Frank Chipman, as I understand, I think it was really tight. You mentioned you didn't quite have the votes, but it was a good life lesson. 4 years later, you're then successful in 2003. Some people would maybe venture into this form, not have success, and say, okay, maybe it's not for me. What kept you? What made you come back in 2003?
So I had a really good experience in campaigning. I got a chance to meet a lot of people in the community, and I stayed engaged in the community in lots of ways. But the Ham government in their early mandate made a few changes in healthcare, which impacted our community. And I got involved in Danny Graham's leadership campaign. My first, I still do. I have a lot of respect for Russell McClellan. Was one of the reasons that I agreed in '99. I admired him as an MP, and I admired him as our premier. When Danny got into the race and ended up winning the leadership, that just seemed like a natural extension for me, because I had great admiration for Danny and his work ethic, and we supported each other, and I supported him during the campaign. So it just became the natural time for me to do it, as opposed to sitting it out.
Well, and if Danny's listening here today, or when we get this podcast up and running, I too share a lot of great respect for Danny. When I was at McGuinness Cooper before my time, Danny had, of course, affiliations there, and as someone that had been involved in law and public life and hockey, there was a lot of similarities. So Danny, if you're listening, Stephen and I both share a lot of great respect for you.
Well, he's the second most important person at McGuinness Cooper, behind Kody Eisner.
That's right, behind Kody Eisner. I think we would all agree with that. I want to take you 4 years. So you're elected in 2003. Francis McKenzie was the leader. 2007's the leadership. Talk to me about, you just told me you never intended to become a leader of a party, but there you go 4 years later, and you become leader. Talk to me a little bit about the thought process leading up to that, and then maybe we can get into what life was like that after.
The irony is, I spent a lot of time trying to convince others to do the job. I had a certain view of how I felt the province should run, and how government should be, and what the role of government would be. So I was looking for a candidate, someone who I thought would be able to do that and move the party in the direction of hopefully governing someday. And then, it became, I started getting calls, and people were asking me, why don't I think about that? And to be honest with you, even at that moment, I never really thought about it. I'm not a big fan of giving speeches. I'm not a guy who, it's not something I did well or lots of. I was never, was never just part of what I did. I always considered myself a guy who just goes out and goes to work, and every once in a while you just work hard and things work out. But I also realize at this point, if I'm going to do this for any extended period of time, I have to try to shape the vision of the party. And that's why I entered the race. I have very strong views on the fiscal policy of the province, and as well as this a progressive social agenda. So I felt that there was an opportunity for me in the voice, and I was fortunate enough in 2007, April 28th, to be given the privilege to lead the party by 68 votes. It was a tight leadership, but I felt good in the party, and then took the opportunity then to start rebuilding the party in lots of ways.
I know 2007 wasn't just yesterday, but talk about the dynamic between going from an MLA, and it was a relatively small caucus. I think at the time the Liberal Party might have been the third party in the legislature.
We were, yeah.
It's we might have been talking 8 or 9, 10 colleagues, but you still had to become the leader. You're still sitting in caucus. Talk to us about that dynamic and how you approached that at that time, for what you recall.
Well, it was also a time where we had to start doing things differently. So it was a moment. It was a time of change. Some members in the caucus were also getting towards the end of their career. So how do we renew? How do we renew the organization? To be honest with you, and part of that was having to change how we did business, from committee structure to how we went out and engaged Nova Scotians. It wasn't easy. I'll be straight up with you. The party, uh, the caucus was small. Many of them had been there for a period of time. They were used to doing things a certain way, which was their way. And you had to come in and reshape and change the purpose of the organization. And that's what we tried to do early on. And tried to go out and get candidates and renew the organizations that we had in riding associations. As you know, as an elected official, whether it's an MP or an MLA, the people in your riding are critical to help you organize and prepare. And I always say no elected official can get elected by themselves. They can lose on their own. But they cannot get elected by themselves. And so that's really what was the transition. And for me, it meant a lot of time on the road, a lot of windshield time, driving, meeting 3 or 4 people in a church basement to try to encourage someone to take on and help us get organized. And then we prepared for the election campaign of 2009, which allowed us to move into official opposition.
So let's talk about that. 2009, Darrell Dexter, the NDP, form a majority government. As you mentioned, the Liberals gain 2 seats. You become the official opposition leader. Talk to me about that 4-year period and how your role as opposition leader perhaps played in or gained you some experience that served you well in your 8 years once you formed government. And we'll get there, but talk to us broadly about that period in time.
So in 2009, after the election campaign, we became the official opposition. We were joined by 2 new members, Kelly Regan and Andrew Younger, joined us at that time. We didn't make the kind of breakthrough that we'd hoped, and we were on the verge of really history when the NDP got chosen to be government for the first time. So I had actually considered stepping down then because no one really understands how hard this is on everybody around you, and opposition is the hardest place for a leader on the people around them. And if you look historically at our province, no government had been defeated after 1 term. So the NDP were on their first term, which would have meant I would have gone 4 years, ran it, and they would have, if history had repeated itself, they would have kept power in 2013. But I actually, then I kind of had I just kind of said to myself, you asked for the job to become the leader of the party. Maybe it's your job to rebuild the party. Your job may not be to be the premier. Your job may be to get it ready for the next person to take over. So I recommitted myself to kind of getting on the road. And I was liberated in many ways, because I could then go to ridings and say to riding associations, you can't tell me the only people that want to run for the Liberal Party look like me. That's just, so I was liberated, because I thought to myself, you know what, I'm gonna set this thing up to reflect the province that I live in. And we had ended up having the most diverse group of candidates in the history of the party, and the most diverse caucus in 2013 when we went into that campaign. But it became halfway through. So we were doing all that work in 2009, 2010. Jeff McCullen, Zach Churchill join us. Karen Casey joins us. And that was those were big changes for us. You could sense the conversation changes at our caucus table. The 2 young guys coming in full of energy, very supportive, and worked hard. And Karen joined us with so much wealth of experience, and quite honestly, she was someone that I would rely on a lot in supporting what we were doing. But I also would say to you, what really happened for the party in a really positive way. Diana Whalen got elected when I did in '03. We ran against the leadership. She was in the caucus with me, but she was the only woman for really until Kelly joined her in '09. And then when Karen came, the dynamic around our caucus table changed a lot. So we have now 3 accomplished women who are at the table. We have 2 new young colleagues who have joined us, along with a group of others who had been at various stages of their own career. So it became focused more on what is the public policy stuff as opposed to what an opposition party normally does, which is complain. So we ended up putting out some real interesting policies around, the energy situation of province, and the government of the day started to falter. So it gave us an opportunity to put some economic policies out and really some philosophical ones for me, in the sense that government should not be the bank for businesses. If I always said this, if the bank doesn't think you're a good bet, I'm not sure everyone thinks the taxpayer should be. But so that was kind of and then of course we just continued to rise. And ironically, that 09, 10, 11, the work that we were doing in those years really put us in position to be a really alternative to a faltering government. And in 2013, we made history.
And so let's go to 2013, setting the stage for those listeners that may or may not be familiar with Nova Scotia politics. 4 years of NDP government. To be fair to Darrell Dexter, it came on the heels of the economic recession in 2008, 2009, but also part of the ideology of the party in terms of some of the spending choices that were made. About $1 billion deficit over 4 years. You come with a different vision. I guess the question I had when I was thinking about this last night, Stephen, is what were you thinking on the night of the election? And maybe you can talk about the election if you want, but certainly on the night that you knew that you had just formed a majority government, what's going through your mind? And then certainly when you wake up the next morning, Christ, that must be some type of feeling. Talk about that if you would.
Well, you know what, I've obviously thought about my parents. They would have been, my mother was there when I became the leader. She was not alive when I became the leader of the official opposition. So I obviously thought about both of my parents. What a night it was for my family, my siblings. They had no idea what they were in for, I don't think. Yeah, and you know what? And the other thing that I think I've always said this, one of the things that got lost on election night in October of 2013 was, yes, history was made. We defeated a one-term government for the first time in over 100 years. But the quality of the people who got elected with me to form government, I think, matches up against any group of people that were elected in the history of the province. I had number of them could easily be the leader of the party. One of them is now, but it could have been, others. Minister Casey led a political party. Karen came when she crossed the floor. She was a big part of us in opposition, and she was a solid person in cabinet. I could list around the table, but I'm afraid of leaving people out. All of my colleagues know I always mention her because in the last few years as my deputy premier, we did a lot of policy stuff together. But the quality of that group, and I went in with 11, 12 current members who had experience, and then I brought with us a number of people who had life experiences. And I mean, Lloyd Hines had 25 years of municipal politics before he joined us. A wealth of experience. Mark Fury, in 2013 joined us after a long distinguished career with the RCMP, and then and he committed to running. There was just a great group that came in, and so I was excited about that, and I was excited about the privilege to actually, appoint a cabinet. That's a pretty unique experience for anyone to have that privilege to be able to put together a cabinet.
Just quickly, I don't want to spend too much time on this. You wake up the next morning. Is there a weight of saying, my God, I'm the Premier of Nova Scotia, my responsibilities to a million people? What does that feel like, if you can?
Oh, you know what? We were excited. You know, I had a path of where I was going. I knew what I wanted to do. I also, because it's gonna sound a bit odd, but I, I never thought I would be in that position, because if you look at historically, we don't defeat a government after one term, you know, and we as a party don't give you more than two terms, two tries to become the premier. So I knew going into this campaign, would have been one way or another, it was going to change my life. I was either going to win and become the premier, or I was going to lose and figure out what's next. Fortunately, we won. And you know what, that morning I was excited that the real you know, magnitude of all of it happens when you start putting a budget together and realize the financial health of the province isn't quite what you even wasn't quite what any of us thought it was. Yeah.
Well, that's a good segue to my next question was, you know, as an opposition leader, you have some semblance of through the legislature about what's going on with the province. But once you had the chance to sit down and get your briefings and kind of get your bearings, was there any major surprises?
Maybe the depth of the deficit, but not really. You know, we knew there was going to have to be some tough decisions. You know, we were on the heels of a labor contract that was settled by the former government, which was 7.5 over 3 years. It was a substantial bill that we were left to pay, and at a time when the province was about $500 million in the hole. So we knew there was going to be tough decisions that were going to be required to put us back in some level of fiscal health, and kudos to the team. They answer. I always say they answered the call. It's tough to be an elected official when you're saying no to people, and that's really what we started out doing. And it was really not no to get back to a balance. It was no to get back to a position to be able to reshape and reinvest into the province. I would argue we transformed how government functions in many ways, and we opened the province up to the world. We're very proud of our place in the federation, but we were also very proud of the role that we could play on our own. The work we did in China, the work we did in Europe, the immigration success we had, those were all big parts of that. And you know, the other thing, Kody, that we did, and it was a gift given to us, really. The Dexter government put together the One Nova Scotia Coalition. We now call it the Ivany Report. And that when that report came out, and it was a gift to us as a government. There was no surprise in it, and the recipe of success that, you know, kind of lined up to a lot of what I personally thought about, you know, small business, innovation, growing the startup community, and that. But it was important that it was said by Ray, who has a tremendous amount of credibility, you know, across all sectors in the province. The people that were on the committee with him all have had a distinguished careers and still do. So when they laid that out, it really gave us a bit of, I don't want to say cover to do some of the stuff we had to do, and to actually challenge Nova Scotians to be more forward thinking, more outward thinking, and that's what we did.
So you mentioned that the past government had given you a gift. One of the things, and perhaps it's my own curiosity as a public official, is, you know, we certainly know the White House in terms of the transition. Was there a conversation with Daryl on the way out? What does that look like in terms of any type of conversation to say, look, good luck in passing the torch, so to speak?
So of course I had a conversation with Daryl, and they opened up or whatever was required. A lot of that transition happened so Tom Hayes chaired my transition team. He would have worked with a lot of that team. Daryl and I really, and he did do and would have done anything that I'd asked him to do in that transition. He made it very much of an easy transition for me. I had a great, and I still chat with him once in a while. But yeah, but it really was with the official level, and then for us. And for me, it really was our transition team looked at the leaders inside of government. Do we have the right players that will be able to fulfill our mandate? We made some adjustments there, and then it was looking how do we set put a cabinet together, who's in, who's out, and so the transition was one of those periods of time where I was. We tried to get a good cross section of Nova Scotians to help us with that. A couple weeks in, and then we were able to go hit the ground running.
You mentioned some of the things just broadly that you're very proud of, the opening up of Nova Scotia, the changing in the mindsets around immigration, driving innovation in the private sector, all of those things. And we could go to great depths, recognizing that I would keep you here all day, but I can't. What are some of the most memorable moments for you, whether it be like in your 8 years? I mean, COVID is, and we can talk about COVID and put that in a bit of a different length, but certainly pre-COVID, what are some of the memorable moments for you?
So the Home for Colored Children, when our government was able to officially apologize and really set us on a course of reconciliation with the residents and try to learn some lessons. The institutional racism in our province created an environment where these young kids come into care, and instead of being loved and supported, they were hurt and harmed. And we wanted to make sure that we gave them a voice. So that really has stood out for me as being one that I, cherish the relationship I built and some of the relationships I built in China with our export opportunities have been, still some of them are still exist today. Pre-primary was a second term initiative, but it was one that it really signifies what I think government can do, and it kind of is part of why we did all of the stuff we did early on. It's not because I like arguing with people. It's not because I enjoy saying no. It was to put us in a position to be reinvest for everybody. So you can't consume all of your tax money into salaries because you have no ability to invest in programs. So that was what the first really 4 years was about. And then to be able to do pre-primary, and now that every 4-year-old, regardless of the socioeconomic circumstances they live in, get an opportunity to evidence-based, play-based program here in every school community across our province. And it actually puts the province, I think, in a really enviable position to actually dovetail into what's happening right now at the national level around childcare. How do we continue to build on that pre-primary program here and work its way down for infants to the kid who enters into that 4-year-old program? How do we build for Nova Scotia an early childcare program that is affordable and also is one that we use the skills of our early childhood educators who can actually provide a great opportunity for kids. So those are highlights, as part of it. There's all kinds of other things, but I better not tell them online.
Well, it's funny you mentioned childcare in the pre-primary program. I had the chance, of course, we're speaking on the budget in the House over the last couple of weeks, and I mentioned your leadership in our province of bringing this forward because it's a policy that not only makes social sense, but it makes economic sense. It can pay for itself over time, and I think you're right that Nova Scotia is well placed to build upon the success that you've started. Let me ask you this. There was challenges abound. I think of pictures of teachers outside the legislature, public servants. Those were difficult days. Any regrets that you have over time?
Not related to the labor file. I would have liked to have settled them sooner, easier. But you know what? This province has a history, governments in this province has a history of caving. Someone gets loud and they cave and provide them with collective agreement that the province simply cannot sustain. And in order for us to fulfill our mandate, we needed to be able to live within our means. We weren't asking public servants to take nothing. We were asking them to take less. We couldn't let them take up all the growth in our province. I alluded to earlier, in 2013, our economy grew by $500 million. The labor contract that the previous government settled was $700 million. Doesn't take a mathematician to figure out that's not good math for the people of the province. And we had no capacity to invest. I had no way to invest in autism program. I had no way to invest in pre-primary. No way to invest in graduate opportunities, retaining more young people, given their first job here at home. So I don't regret those decisions about trying to ensure that we slow down the growth of public sector wages in the province and benefits, which, by the way, were better than than what you would have seen outside in the private sector. The pharma care issue was one that if I could have a do-over, I'd pull that one back in because we didn't fix the problem. We thought we were fixing a problem, and all we did was transfer that problem to somebody else. So I would have that one back and do that over again. But by and large, you make the decisions on the day with the information that you have, and you move on, and that's really what we tried to do.
I know you obviously came to the decision when you did about saying, okay, this is my time to step down. I need a rest, or this is just a good juncture for me. I've kind of got to where I needed to get this province to the vision that I had. With all that you've achieved, is there anything that you wish you had a little bit more time, notwithstanding the fact that, is there anything left on the table that you wish you could have got accomplished?
So there's always stuff on the table. There's always stuff there. I decided that it was time simply because if you look historically across Canada, and I would argue smaller provinces more than larger ones, but if you look historically across the country, after 2 terms, governments find themselves getting into trouble. And it doesn't mean the party can't govern for more than 2 terms, but the leader has to me, if you have a window to govern 2 majority terms, you know what? You've done a lot, and you should be thanks. And we talked about the labor stuff, and we've talked about I used up a lot of capital with people that I was governing, and so it just was at that moment in time. I was still enjoying it, and I still loved it. I've been saying to people more recently, I don't miss being the premier. I never let that job define me or that office. I miss the people I had around me a lot. There were people that I spent a lot of time with. I had a great relationship with many of the public servants who worked on behalf of Nova Scotians. But it was time on that side. The thing that I really, to be honest with you, that has been the hardest transition has been the COVID file. I feel like I've left unfinished business in some ways, and really, but either was going to have to run again, which I don't think was in the best interest of the party or the party or the province. So it was just time I had, because of the election cycle, that was the moment in time I had to get off the train. But yeah, so it's a privilege to do it, and I'm leaving still loving it. Very few people get to exit this job on their own terms, and I did, and I'm happy with that. Considering I never wanted to be the leader, I never wanted to be the premier. To end up 2 terms and people still wanting a bit more, I feel good about that.
No, not every premier necessarily leaves office on a high note, and I think revered by the public. I know, Stephen, that you would have your critics, but there's many people I know.
I live with some of them.
Oh, do you? And you're talking about, of course, making that decision to leave on your own time. Scott Bryson, I think, once referenced, there's too many politicians that don't get the message and have to get airlifted off the battlefield, is I think the way he described it. But I'll let him speak to that. I want to go quickly to your trade relationships. You mentioned China, you mentioned Europe. You, perhaps more than any other premier in recent memory, really drove the narrative that we as Nova Scotians have to be able to think beyond our borders. We have to be able to see the world, and that we play a key role in it, sometimes to criticism. You know, you spent a lot of time in China, in Asia, building relationships. You spent some time in Europe. Um, you know, with everything that's going on in the world around China, and on particularly the concerns around COVID-19 and countries around the world looking a little bit more inward, are you concerned about the legacy and the work that you built that could be in jeopardy in the years ahead?
No, I've said this many times. Isolation and protectionism has never worked. Otherwise, Cuba would be thriving. Look what happened. They tried to do that, and you know, it's what I believe we need to do from ourselves or for ourselves is how do we go out and engage? It doesn't mean we agree with everyone that we're trading with and everything they do. But if we get into a position of cutting off all relationships with people, we lose our ability to actually have impact, I think, on the sides that we want. So you want to change how China is functioning? Keep engaging with them. Keep showing their children what it's like to live in Nova Scotia and Canada and other parts of the world. That's where the change will come from. It's never, governments have never had the global moral authority to go in and actually affect change by isolation or protectionism. I think you go and you engage, you show them what we have to offer. I would argue that's what's happened in Hong Kong. Now it's still ongoing, but it's that group of young people in Hong Kong saw a different view of China and a different way of interacting globally. That's where I think we need to do and part of when we went in there, I'll be straight up with you. My first going in was really just about to sell seafood, because I felt you know, I live in one of the most lucrative fisheries in the lobster fisheries in the province here in southwestern Nova Scotia, over in the Bay Shore. They're doing well, but everyone was telling me we have the best seafood in the world, yet we weren't paying for it and we weren't getting a price for it. Well, that made no sense to me. So to me, we really focused our trade on how do we market our products, blueberries, into the Asian market. It's you know, so that's why we went in there, really was to get a focused approach. We went into, we literally have with our trading partner next door, the US, for a long time, they were really setting the price for us. They're an important part for us, but we needed to get into that in Asia, in our view, in my view, to be able to say, okay, this is the largest growing economy in the world. How do we get part of that? And then go back and refocus on Europe, which we did. Predominantly the UK, when we started in there, was predominantly is where we went in. And I'm really grateful that the Prime Minister has been able to ensure that the trade agreement with the EU will also be respected in the UK. That's an important thing for Nova Scotia and the region. So we just kind of said, let's be focused on our trade to make sure that we maximize the value of our products. And then when I get into China, I realized there was much more to this. We have kids who come here, you know, more than half of our international students come from China, and there's tremendous opportunity to grow that cohort. 15 schools have our curriculum being taught in China. And then in some parts of China, where we were really worked in what we call the Bay Area, which is Hong Kong through Zhuhai, Macau area, the middle class was booming, and the culture was there, and it gave us a chance to share some of our culture. So many of your listeners may not know, but we had a Maud Lewis art exhibit and 6 other Nova Scotian female artists in a number of art galleries in China. We were going to we did welcome some of a dance troupe here as part of the Chinese New Year. So to me, that doesn't mean, listen, we all want the two Michaels home. Let's be clear about that. We're all supporting the national government's efforts to make that happen. But at the same time, in order for us, and I think, and the ambassador has been great to deal with. We would go in, we would work, but I'm a subnational government. I don't have the authority to actually solve the issue of the two Michaels. I have the authority to raise it, and the capacity to raise it. At the same time, we used that we used our opportunity in China to sell product, and then we refocused on the EU, which I'm excited that we left an EU strategy as well that the new government will be able to continue to build on.
I want to talk about the federation. So we just went external. Let's talk about domestic politics in Canada, because of course you formed government first in 2013 when Stephen Harper was still the prime minister. And then of course you've seen the transition with our current prime minister. I guess my question would be, we talked about relationships. You talked about Karen Casey and some of your caucus colleagues that really helped shape your leadership in Nova Scotia. Talk to me about the dynamic in the federation and maybe relationships you built with other premiers or territorial leaders, and perhaps the dynamic between the provinces and the federal government. Has that changed over time with Harper to the current prime minister with Justin Trudeau, or is it always kind of sometimes the provinces and territories playing one off each other against the federal government?
No, I mean, first of all, when I left, I was the longest serving Canadian premier at the time, which tells you how volatile the elections have been across the country. I think I've served with 4 premiers in Alberta. That should tell you something. So there were probably 20 other first ministers that I would have, more than 20 other first ministers that I would have been dealing with in my time in office. Depending on where you are in the country, this is a complex country to govern in many ways. The view that we have here in the East Coast compared to, the prairies is very different. I always, regardless of who was at the table, people ended up coming to the table really with their own provincial view, but it very quickly turned to the country. We didn't have many of those meetings with the former government that he would have been at. He more did bilateral stuff. So I worked with them. Peter MacKay was the regional minister at the time, who was great for me to deal with. He was able to represent us at the national at the cabinet table. So that was different. When Prime Minister Trudeau came in, there became more first minister meetings where the prime minister would come. And we would go through issues really with each other. But the dynamic is always one of, they have a national view of how things have to happen, and we each have either our own provincial or regional view of how things are supposed to be, and occasionally we agree. Occasionally we agree. The question always comes for me, and it always has been one of, how do you generate fairness, and how do you across the country, and what is the give and take? We were supporting, as a province, Alberta and Newfoundland on when they needed some support as 2 provinces that have not provinces, but whose financial, the pandemic going in, oil prices collapsing, we were supporting them to have a different arrangement with the national government. They would support us on our different view of a carbon tax. We went with a cap and trade Nova Scotia system. So I have always felt that people, even some people with very different political ideology, would end up focusing on the country at the end.
I want to talk a little bit about, you mentioned Newfoundland, and it triggers, of course, they're going through their own fiscal challenges right now with their equivalent of the Ivan report that was just released yesterday. Coles Notes version, but what advice would you give to Andrew Furey if he's listening in right now?
Well, I think they're very different in some ways. If you go back and look at the Ivany report, it was about growth, and yes, cost containment, but they really left that to government. What they focused on was how do we focus change? So, they set targets for startups. growth in numbers of population, what is the innovation hubs we're creating. Those were the kinds of, to me, and I think that is the genius of what the Ivany report was really about. They left much of public policy in the sense of cutting taxes and all of that and the nuts and bolts, or raising taxes, to the elected side, but they focused on this pathway of reshaping our view of ourselves. I say to we got younger last year. Well, I will tell you that one of the Ivany reports around telling us about immigration targets is part of that, but so is the innovation hubs, so is the ocean frontier that we have, so is Volta, so is the idea program at Dow. That's where young people want to be, in that kind of a work environment. That's what I think was the really the important part. And how many startups can you get? Listen, you go into Volta, and if you don't come out of there jazzed, you're not breathing, because these young people have an idea, they put it on the table and they shoot it around. What I saw in Newfoundland, there was a bit of they get into talking about privatization of programs, they get into tax issues, they get, that's, to me, is a little more difficult for that debate to be happening. Like, the Ivany report never said I needed to control costs. They gave me path to grow. We knew we had to control costs. That was a public policy position that we decided to take. We didn't lay anybody off, but we certainly slowed the growth of it down. And that was just a public policy approach. In Newfoundland, they're talking about a very different one. And in fairness, the status, I guess my message to Newfoundland and Labradorians, and really Canadian, status quo is not acceptable. It's not sustainable. You cannot sustain yourself. Premier Fury has a tough task as Premier Ball did. I think of what his first budget that he had to bring in. And he made tough decisions. He's Premier Fury will be in that same boat. How do I control the cost containment of government? At the same time, how am I letting the private sector grow here? Because ultimately, that's what this has to. There has to be a balance between public sector growth and private sector growth. It cannot be. Public sector can't spend our way into growing the economy. It's not sustainable. It doesn't work. It never has. There's this socialist idea of this is how we're going to do things all the time. It sounds wonderful, but in reality, you can't do it. So you need this private sector growth. It's bringing in new revenues, creating new jobs. Our graduate opportunities program has retained over 1,000 university and community college kids in Nova Scotia to their first job. Well, there's lots of stats that tell you where they get their first job is where they spend a lot of their life. So we're retaining those people here. So that's, to me, where Newfoundland. I'm now out of office, so I can give everyone advice. I would seriously look at some of the decisions that they had and look at some of the cost measures that they talked about. But I would encourage them to dust off the Ivany Commission here, because I think what was described here is not unique to here. You can do it in most places, and especially in the Atlantic region. How do I, the whole welcoming more people? I would like at some point for us to get at the same level of the immigration numbers as Manitoba. That we increase these, the nominee program up to that 5,000 threshold. That's, to me, and we do it in a thoughtful way. It's not like we're going to say just come and and everyone just show up and grow up. They're coming to fill jobs. They're coming to create jobs. They're coming to drive opportunity. That needs to continue. Newfoundland has to continue to grow their population, and they really, like we do. We have to understand what the next generation of employees want. They don't want to go to a workplace like I had, or they don't want to go to a cubicle. They don't want to go to an office 9 to 5. They want to be in an energy-based environment where people are thriving, feeding off one another. how do you set that up and how do you build on that? So I wish them well in Newfoundland and Labrador, and I hope that people realize change is not a bad thing. Change happens every day to all of us. And I said this back at the beginning of my journey. We're either going to shape it or it's going to shape us. And I prefer to shape it. It's just that's in our hands. And that means that everyone has to be part of the solution. And I would say to you, the public sector, Newfoundland and Labrador, has to recognize they have to be part of the solution and work with the government to allow them to invest in other aspects of the economy of Newfoundland and Labrador so that the private sector can grow, because the more it grows, the more there is to share.
You hit on a couple important points that I hear a lot here in King's Hants, of course, is about the quality of life that we have in Nova Scotia. That's what you were talking about in terms of the future workplace and what's going to attract people to their work opportunities. We know, of course, with more digital in terms of online, whether it be learning, but certainly workspaces, the fact that we can have this conversation right now, you need reliable broadband. So certainly a tip of the cap. You at a provincial level have shown strong leadership in that domain, and certainly the labor piece. Every small business I talk to, it seems like here in the Annapolis Valley in particular, is looking for employees. So I think you hit this right on the head. Stephen, look, I could keep you here all day. I've got about 3 more questions, but maybe we'll have to commit to getting you back onto the podcast.
So I will continue. Before you go on to those questions, but I will tell you this: one of the things the pandemic has provided us with is, so we actually, because people can't travel, we took our tourism basically advertising budget, and we started advertising across the country to come visit, stay, and play and work from here. The pandemic has demonstrated to what you're just describing, you can work from anywhere. So if the board of directors of RBC can fly into Toronto every once in a while for a board meeting, why can't the vice president be living in Nova Scotia and doing their job as they have been for the last year and a half? There's a real opportunity for us to promote the way of life we have here, but we can actually attract people who can actually work from here. And I think governments, including the provincial government here, are going to have to realize people's mindset has changed a little bit when it comes to work. They can work from here. We now know Zoom meetings work. Doesn't mean we're not going to come together in the future, but why can't why can't our VP fly in from wherever they want to live in Canada into Toronto or wherever? To me, there's a real opportunity for that kind of growth in the economy and population of the province. I just thought I'd throw that in.
No, look, and we're seeing that right now. I mean, there's literally thousands of people. I mean, it's putting a pressure on our housing market, which I know comes with its own set of challenges, but we have to view that in the lens of it's a good thing that people want to move to this province and want to be part of the communities and the place that we call home. So maybe we'll have more to say. We'll get you back, Stephen. We'll get you back to talk. Any advice to Ian? You mentioned, of course, we had a ton of, there was a lot of great candidates on the line, even with the 3 that ended up running. To the extent that you can tell us without breaching any secret conversations, what advice did you give to our current premier when that transition took place?
Well, Premier Rankin really doesn't need any advice from me. The best thing former premiers can do is stay out of the way. I've certainly offered him support if he wants it. I think one of the things and advice that I had received, prior to becoming premier was you have to believe, you have to sell what you believe. Your policies have to reflect who you are and what you believe, because the public is looking at you. You are the face of your government, and they can tell when you're not sincere about the position you take. And Ian will find his, and he is out there now doing his, and his team. His team needs to rally around him and provide that support. He's going to have to head into a campaign pretty soon. I'm looking forward to seeing that go, but. Ian Premier Rankin will do just fine. He certainly has, and he's been with me since 2013, came in, and I think he will build on what we were able to do together and take it to the next level and add his own fingerprints to the next 4 years of growing on that success. He's a big immigration guy, and I know, and he's certainly obviously been working on the environment side, but I hope people recognize that he's also ran his own business, knows how to grow the economy, has some interesting ideas about growth. So I look forward to him getting a chance to express that to Nova Scotians.
Two more for you. I know even in my short time in office, 18 months, I've got a fiance at home. I've got a mother who you had the chance to meet. Actually, we're at a restaurant in Halifax, and she was always saying she's worried about me and in the public space. But talk about the role of family. I mean, you've been in this. You were involved in the business of public life for 18 years. You mentioned your wife Andrea, Jeff, and Colleen. This wouldn't have been possible without family, I assume. Can you speak to what they meant to you?
Yeah, so I couldn't have been able to do this job over the last 17 years without the commitment of really Andrea to do. In many ways, this was long before I ever thought of running for a leadership role. Just being an MLA and MP, you're away a lot. Even when the House is not sitting, you have committee duties, responsibilities. So our real goal was to try to make sure, because you never know how long this lasts, was try to make sure that our children's lives stayed somewhat the same. So hockey was still a priority, swimming, curling, whatever it was they were doing would still be a priority, which meant, but it all fell to Andrea really. When I got elected, I used to coach sports, and I didn't at the time. So she took all of that on, and in many ways kept our kids grounded in this. And so when I came home, it wasn't, I learned very quickly that I had to fall in line myself. Pretty easy for those of us who are parents to, be away for 3 or 4 days and then come home and try to be the hero, not knowing all the dynamics that your partner has had with your children. Because kids are smart enough, they'll try to figure out how to play you off against each other. So I had to come home and become the 2IC here. She was really in charge of what took place here. And for us, I couldn't have done that without her. And then my brothers and sisters were a big part of this. Many of them were impacted by the decisions I made around, there's teachers, there's public servants, police officers. So when I was making those decisions that were impacting Nova Scotians in terms of slowing down the growth of wage and salaries, that was, my siblings were part of that, and they all demonstrated that the title of brother was going to out-trump that of premier, and they stayed committed to me. And if they had an issue with me, I usually heard about it privately, not elsewhere. But they've been tremendous, and I can tell you, the further in that I got, obviously social media played a big part of that. You have to kind of harden everybody around you to that kind of what happens online, and what's said online, and you have to kind of really put it in perspective that it's, many of the people who have an opinion about you don't even know you other than through your job. And so but yeah, it would have been impossible to have, and you know what, I have 2 extraordinary adult children, because Andrea did the job of raising them while I was out doing this job as premier.
You mentioned, of course, some people don't even necessarily know who you are other than through that social media, and it's both a benefit and it can be a drawback, right? It can be a nasty place. It's funny that you say this, and this is less of a question, Stephen, and more of a comment. It's funny because I've had the chance to get to know you even during my brief time through Liberal events or otherwise, and even having Christina in my office, for example, who worked with you, she said, you're a teddy bear. But sometimes you didn't always have that public persona. People would think, oh, geez, he's stern, he's upset. But I think that was always, trying to defend your principled approach to make beneficial change and to be really caring. But that's more just a comment. I think, conversations like this help illustrate who the real Stephen McNeil is. 50 years from now, you've been defined. I certainly would call you a consequential premier. 50 years from now, if someone gets a recording of this audio or this video, how would you want your government and your time in office to be remembered?
I hope people will look at us and say we showed up to work every day, and we had the best interests of all Nova Scotians at heart. Our public policies were based on everybody, not a few of us. But that we just, that we engage Nova Scotians in a way to and reshape the province. So I hope that people will remember our government as one that went to work every day to try to improve the lives of every Nova Scotian. When you're the premier, you were elected to represent everybody, not just a few. So I've been very, very fortunate. I appreciate you mentioning Christina, who's I'm sure the brains behind your office now. But I will say this to you: one of the things that I think elected officials don't do enough of is expressing our appreciation for all those who have worked with us. My time, whether it was leading the party as third place or leading in official opposition and going into government, was only made possible because of good citizens who found their way to give public service, which is to go and work for an MP, an MLA, the premier, the prime minister. These aren't jobs that are, contrary to everyone thinks, they're not the highest paying jobs in the province, but they give lots of experience to people. And for me, which Christina was part of that, another of your constituents, Laurie Graham, was part of it, team, Courtney, Steve Hiscock, Kevin Musgrave, Laurel Monroe in the end with us. We were, the COVID journey was really, I couldn't have done it without them. We became the first bubble in the province. We all would go to work, and I would have never been able to, survive. I get lots of credit. People are giving me lots of credit. Stay the Blazers home wasn't mine. They were just the words I used. I delivered them, I guess, but that was the team. Laurie put that together with our team. Christina did all of my social media stuff. And I'm not ashamed and embarrassed to admit it. There were times in the last year that it took its toll on me, and for those that were close to me would have seen it. But the people around me picked it up, and they filled my gas tank up and gave me a chance to, I guess, reintroduce myself to Nova Scotians in a way that I hadn't in the first 7 roughly years of my time. So for all the listeners out there, when you think of public officials, give those that work for them lots of kudos, and be thankful that they have found their way to give back to the province they love and care about.
Look, I couldn't have said it better myself, Stephen. I'm sitting here in my office in Wolfville, and I can actually hear Tanya in my office helping a constituent right now. Look, my last question is rapid fire, so it'll be quick, and you'll just simply have to tell me.
Two politicians being quick. I don't know about that.
That's a rarity. You mentioned, so we'll get right to it. It just whatever comes to the top of your mind. So look, we know that your mother was a role model and a mentor, but whether it be in politics, any role model or mentor that comes to mind?
Oh, my mother would be the person that I would always lean to and always look at. I've also been fortunate. I've said this to you, maybe I haven't said it to you, I've said it to others. Men have a responsibility to be good role models, more so in lots of ways. I grew up without my father. And to find good examples of male role models isn't easy. Sometimes you like to think so, but my mother would always have been the rock I would have stood on for sure.
Okay. Favorite Nova Scotia premier? I mean, you obviously had an interest in public affairs. When you look back over time, is there one that you idolized or thought, that was someone that was good for our province?
Well, Russell and I are good friends, so I would obviously say Russell. I say, Dr. Savage in his time, I think, tried to lead a government similar to what we tried to do, which was what we thought was right. And I think he tried that.
Favorite place to visit outside of Nova Scotia?
Oh, Belgium's nice. Guangzhou city in China is nice. Paris is nice. London's nice.
Sounds like you're going to be wanting to travel after we get through this pandemic, to say the least.
I'm going to Barra as well. So I'm definitely going to Barra when the pandemic is over. That's the ancestor, my Barra off the coast of Scotland. It's where the McNeils all come from. So I'm going to go and see what that's like.
My fiance is from Scotland as well. Beautiful country. And I know you've been there.
Amazing country. Yeah.
Amazing country. Favorite NHL team?
Montreal Canadiens.
Hey, we got that in common. Favorite season? So summer, spring, winter, what's your favorite?
Oh, this time of the year, I would say probably it's starting to see things come alive again. I live down in the valley, so we've cut our grass a few times. The grass is green here. You're starting to see the buds come out. It's a season of waking up.
Sweet or salty?
Sweet.
Just like me. Handicap in golf?
Me.
You're handicapping golf, you.
Me.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I know that you certainly you enjoy golf, and you haven't had a whole lot of time to be able to do that lately, Stephen. So we look forward to. I'll have to check in a few months and see where that handicap might have got once you get some rounds in at Eden Valley. And so, look, anything else that we haven't covered? Anything else you might want to say to any Nova Scotian that might be listening?
Listen, I just want to say to Nova Scotians, thank you. This past year has been a hell of a year in our province, and you have rallied around one another, and you've supported one another, and you've cared for one another. And my message to you is, don't stop. This pandemic is still here, but more importantly, don't stop even after it's gone. Continue to reconnect and make sure that your neighbors looked after, and that people that you care about you connect in with. The Nova Scotians continue to be who you are, which is caring, loving people and looking out for one another, and we'll be just fine.
Stephen, I'll say personally, thank you so much for taking the time to come in and have this conversation. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you for your public service, not only just as your time as the First Minister here in Nova Scotia, but indeed your service as the MLA for Annapolis for 18 years. And we really appreciate everything that you've done. Again, this is Honorable Stephen McNeil, the former Premier of Nova Scotia. And Stephen, we never even got into what you're going to be doing next. So maybe in a few, we'll have to wait till your next adventure comes. We'll bring you back on the podcast. But thank you for your time here today.
Look forward to it.
Okay.